All right, we'll go ahead and get this Planning Commission meeting started this Wednesday, March 8th, 2023, the hour of 7:01 p.m. here in City Council Chambers in Twila City Hall. First item on our agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance. If you all please rise and repeat with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Next item on our agenda is a roll call. Commissioner Hammer.
Here.
Commissioner Proctor.
Present.
Commissioner Sloan. Here. Commissioner Robinson.
Here.
Commissioner Jensen.
Here.
Commissioner Goches.
Present.
I also recognize Commissioners Dunn and Newell in the back. We've got staff members Bolzer, Agard, Hanson, and Baker, with Council Member Hanson joining us tonight. Our minutes taker is not here, so Commissioners, if you would, please state your name before your comment so she can make it easier on her. I'd greatly appreciate that. Number 3 on our agenda is a public hearing and a decision on a conditional use permit request by Adeline Dallas for a home-based daycare involving the care of 8 to 16 children at 555 West, 1470 North on .16 acres in the R17 residential zoning district. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this application for a conditional use permit involves the property highlighted in red on your aerial photograph. It's located in the Lexington Green subdivision, just south of 1470 North and near 550 West. The property is currently zoned R17 residential, as you can see, as are all of the surrounding properties. And this is the document that was submitted by the applicant showing their intentions for drop-off and pickup. As mentioned, this is a conditional use permit application for a home-based daycare business involving the care of 8 to 16 children. The applicant did not specify the exact number, but given the range, if it's above 8, she needs a conditional use permit. So they did provide a traffic plan showing what she's planning on dealing with that. The parking would be handled primarily in the driveway. However, there is also some space in their frontage to accommodate parking. As I explained in the staff report, daycare is a little bit different from a preschool. They're not session-oriented, so people won't be arriving at the same time to pick up or drop off their kids. That would be dependent upon the schedules of the guardians. Yeah, that's pretty much the report that I have on this proposed home-based daycare. This item is a public hearing. We did send out notifications to the neighboring property owners. I did receive one comment from a Jared Scoggin expressing support for the application. That comment was forwarded to the Planning Commission as well as included in your packets. So if you have any questions, be happy to answer those for you, but we are recommending approval of this conditional use permit with the basic conditions listed in your staff report.
All right, let's bring this back to the commission for questions or comments for staff.
I had a question.
Yes, Commissioner Goches.
And it may be for the applicant, but I wondered, is the property fenced? Do they have an independent? I couldn't tell on the map, and it doesn't mention it in the staff report.
I believe the applicant's here and can address that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, this item does require a public hearing. If the applicant is here, we'll go ahead and have them hold off until the end of the public hearing, and they can address all questions if they're available. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. You would please approach the podium, write their name for the record. Also state your name for the record. Seeing no one approach, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this. Is the applicant available in here tonight? Looks like we might not get that answer for you, Commissioner Goches, but looking at the video, or the picture here, it looks like most of it is. All right. Any other further questions or comments from the commission? I'll entertain a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Proctor?
John Proctor making a motion. Move we approve the conditional use permit request by Adeline Dallas to authorize the use of a child care at preschool involving 8 to 16 children to occur at 555 West, 1474 North, application number P23-103, based on the findings and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated February 15th, 2023.
I have a motion to approve this conditional use permit from Commissioner Proctor. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second from Commissioner Jensen. Commissioner Hammer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Proctor?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Goches?
Aye.
I also vote aye as Chairman Hamilton. This one passes 7-0. Number 4 on our agenda is a public hearing and a recommendation on a land use map amendment request by Holly Jones to reassign the land use designation for approximately .39 acres located at 60 South Main Street from community commercial to mixed use. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This application involves the long, narrow parcel highlighted in red on your aerial photograph, the old Gordon Furniture Building, I believe, located west of Main Street, north of 100 South, and east of 50 West. The property is currently zoned GC, General Commercial, as are all of the surrounding properties. The applicant is requesting the land use map amendment in order to facilitate an eventual change in zoning to a zoning district that will permit a particular land use she wishes to accommodate in the building, a residential treatment facility. Currently, you can see the land use map designates the property as community commercial. The community commercial designation encourages and recommends the general commercial zone as well as the neighborhood commercial zone. Within those two zones, a residential treatment facility is not permissible. She wishes to change the land use map to mixed use. The mixed use zone does permit residential treatment facilities with a conditional use permit. So if the land use map amendment is approved to mixed use, the property would then qualify for the mixed use general zone or the mixed use Broadway. Mixed use Broadway is really for the Broadway area, so the only candidate here would be the mixed use general zone, where she could accomplish that use that she wants to perform in the building. This item is a public hearing, and notices were sent to the property owners within 200 feet. We did receive one comment from a Mandy Brown expressing opposition to the land use map amendment. That comment was forwarded to the Planning Commission for your reference as well. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
All right, we'll bring this back to the commission for any questions for staff.
Mr. Chair, I have a few
Yes,
questions.
Commissioner Jensen, go ahead.
As I was looking through this, it seemed like in past meetings where we weren't able to change the land use of some, or the zoning of something if it made it not in compliance with the zoning. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I just wondered the setbacks in the building and the lot width and all that, is that permissible the way this lot is in the mixed use zone?
Yes, excellent question. The mixed-use general zone is actually a little more, less restrictive than the general commercial regarding setbacks. The mixed-use general allows 0 lot lines on the sides and the rear yards if it meets building codes. So I don't see any compliance issues if this were to be changed to mixed use. In fact, it'd probably be brought into more compliance than it currently is under the current zoning.
Okay.
That it?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm good.
Did that answer your question?
I did, yes.
Any other questions for staff? All right, we'll go ahead and, this one does require a public hearing. I see Holly is here. We'll go ahead and hold you off till I close the public hearing, and then you can address us if you don't mind. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing for this item on our agenda. If you would, please approach the podium if you have anything to say about this land use amendment request. Seeing no one, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and invite Ms. Jones up to let us address her. No, just kidding. Let us know what your plans are.
Yes. So the subject property right now, as he said, was community general. The downtown overlay district, though, is actually a mixed use. So what I would like to do is to be able to use it as a mixed-use zone, to be able to use the use of a residential treatment facility. The reason for this, currently, I already hold a conditional use permit to be able to have the residents upstairs. So currently, they can reside upstairs as residential, and the commercial is just commercial. The difference is that if my clients or the participants would like any assistance upstairs, they cannot obtain it right now because it's still general use upstairs. So the only thing that we could see to do is to rezone to mixed use.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Jones from the commission? Sounds pretty straightforward, I guess.
Commissioner, I do have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Goches.
You indicated that if the residents needed assistance upstairs, I just wondered what type of assistance you're defining.
So behavioral health. Behavioral health is a huge epidemic, as you know. And to be able to have a treatment facility, we need to be able to facilitate treatment at all areas within the building, within the space. So if somebody needed assistance upstairs, we need to be able to have our clinicians be able to go upstairs to the residential portion to be able to assist them.
Okay. And I know that that building has more than, it has different uses, is that correct? There are different businesses that are there. Is there an elevator in that building that goes up to your second floor for the residential area?
There's not, but we have an ADA unit on the main.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Hammer.
I just have one question. How is the parking lot shared in that area?
Sure. So I have 13 stalls in the back of the building space. The great part about the use is that none of the occupants are allowed to have a vehicle. So that's a difference between like an apartment complex like it used to be. In the 20s, 30s, 40s, this all was apartments upstairs, and there was general commercial downstairs. So this use, they're not allowed to have those cars at the facility.
Any other questions from the commission?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind signing the paper there for us, please. Thank you, Holly. Much appreciated. All right, we'll bring this back to the commission. This is a recommendation on a land use amendment request. I'll entertain a motion on item number 4.
May I just ask another question?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know who this goes to. So if we decide to go ahead and change the use on this, and they have 13 stalls, would that ever affect anything else that could go in there, that they'd need additional parking that we would need to worry about?
That's a pretty good question. Andrew or Jim, either one?
And because the parking to me, I've parked back there for a few different things. I never know or never knew that there was designated parking, that I'm only supposed to park in certain areas. So that could be kind of confusing, I think, to people.
It's real confusing in that downtown. Most of those lots are individually owned. It's kind of a mess in our
Because it
downtown.
kind of just
so.
looks like you just park wherever you can. Okay, thanks.
What I would say in response to that is there's a possibility there could be a parking issue if a use were proposed in that building that required high volumes of parking. In that situation, we would review parking as part of either the business license or any other type of approval. If they don't have sufficient parking, they wouldn't be able to conduct that business there. So that's something we look into when we review business licenses and other use permits.
Okay.
But it could be an issue at some point in time. She could also look into doing cross-parking agreements with other property owners in the area and utilize some of their parking if it was necessary. That's a possibility as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker, yes, please.
Andrew, it's my understanding or my recollection that the parking requirements of the mixed-use general zoning district are less restrictive or burdensome than the general commercial parking requirements and can be reduced significantly depending on the circumstances.
I think that's an accurate statement. The uses in the mixed-use general zone are not as intensive as in the general commercial. So the uses themselves wouldn't require as much parking as a general commercial zone. The uses in that zone currently permit. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
That is an excellent question, Commissioner Hammer. I appreciate that.
I have a question,
Yes,
Mr.
Commissioner
Chair.
Robinson.
Mr. Agard, so if this does change to mixed-use general, then there is permitted for single, double, and multifamily housing. That could be both upstairs and downstairs down the road, right?
Yes, the mixed-use general zone permits all types of housing.
Whereas now it has to be commercial downstairs and it's permitted upstairs. I'm a little hazy on that.
Well, the use that's permitted upstairs that Mrs. Jones is referring to is what we called a group home, which at the time she did her conditional use permit was permissible in the general commercial zone. It no longer is.
Okay.
But that's what she's referring to currently in the building.
All right, that's, okay, that explains that. But if we change this zone and then the business goes away, the zone allows multifamily housing there.
Yes, it does. It does
Okay.
require a conditional use permit, but it does.
It does require a conditional use permit?
It does. Yep, just
Okay.
like the Breezeway Apartments, that requires a conditional use permit. You guys reviewed that recently. Same zone.
Okay.
I have another comment.
Yes,
It's not really a
please.
question.
Commissioner Hammer.
It's kind of a question. One of the letters that we got that was opposing this change addressed some health issues. How do I say that? Cleanliness, things going on in the parking lot and areas. Do we need to have any concern over kind of what's going into this facility?
I don't know if that's in the Planning Commission's purview to deal with that issue. If there's an impact that this would generate that you could address with some conditions, maybe, but I don't think that's something you guys can address. Unless Roger has any thoughts on that.
You could only address it if it were the kind of use that were anticipated to generate levels of garbage that would adversely affect the neighbors, and we have no evidence of that in this use.
Any other questions from the commission? Comments, concerns? All right. I will entertain a motion on item number 4 on our agenda.
Mr. Chairman, just to facilitate moving forward, I'll move forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the Beacon House Land Use Map Amendment request by Holly Jones to reassign the land use designation of the subject property to mixed use. Application number P23-57, based on the findings listed in the staff report dated February 16th, 2023.
I got a positive recommendation from Commissioner Sloan. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second from Commissioner Goches. Commissioner Hammer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Proctor?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Goches?
Aye.
And I am Chairman Hamilton. I also vote aye. This passes with a positive recommendation, 7-0 on up to the City Council. Good luck on your next step. All right. Yes. Okay. As Mr. Bolzer stated, that was tentative for next week's schedule, so look out for that. All right, thank you. Number 5 on our agenda is a City Council reports.
I was going to grab you from here, but
No, you're good. We can hear you.
there's nothing that we had in our city council meeting that's something that you had looked at, but there is some exciting things happening. There is a business coming in on our business park that's making products for ski lifts, and they bought 25 acres and a big deal. That's going to bring a lot of high-paying jobs in the community. So great things. And then there's going to be a street light on 1000 North and First East. Don't know if you heard that, but
Street light or a signal?
a signal. Yeah, a signal. So that'll give some signals, try and get the traffic figured out somehow. Because traffic is a little crazy on North Main. Yeah.
Grandkids there.
Any questions for me? All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Moves us on to number 6 on our agenda is a review and approval of Planning Commission minutes for the meeting held on February 8th, 2023. Were there any corrections, additions, anything to add, subtract? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the minutes for the meeting on the February 8th, 2023.
Motion to approve from Commissioner Robinson. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Hammer. Commissioner Hammer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Proctor?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Goches?
Aye.
I am Chairman Hamilton. I also vote aye. That one passes. Speeding through this one tonight here. Number 7 on our agenda is a Planning Commission training on conditional uses. Mr. Bolzer.
Time to bring the show to a grinding halt.
That's okay.
Conditional uses is everybody's favorite topic, right? You've done it once this evening. There was some discussion recently in a request, I think actually from you, Chairman Hamilton, that we look at conditional uses as a training topic. So here we are. So I'm going to start from real basics that you probably all know. So feel free to jump in with some answers, and then we'll build into some a little more complex topics. So what is a conditional use? Who wants to define what a conditional use is? Told you we'd come to a grinding halt.
I know.
Right away.
It's a use that's permitted, but can't, if you're trying to look for things that can mitigate, conditions that can mitigate any problems.
Good enough, close enough, yes. So a conditional use is a permissible use upon which the approval authority has the opportunity to assign conditions of approval to mitigate specific potential impacts on the neighboring properties. Very close.
You're a lot more elegant than I am.
Well done, Commissioner. Well, in fairness, that's a copy and paste definition. Okay. So well done, Commissioner Jensen. I'll give you more credit than I did. So what does permissible mean? You said permitted. This says permissible. What's the difference?
Yes, permissible is that it's allowable but not guaranteed.
I would shorten that simply to say it's allowable. And we'll talk about why I would shorten that in a little bit. But a permissible use is something that is allowed in some form or another. Whether it's permitted or conditional, it's allowed, very simply. So, how are conditional uses determined? The legislative process of establishing zoning districts and the permissible uses of land within those districts also establishes which permissible uses are permitted or conditional. So what does that mean?
When we create zoning districts, we say what's there and what's allowable and what's not.
Yep, when we establish a zoning district, whether we're amending an existing or establishing new, one of the responsibilities is to do two things. Number one is to examine the scope of uses, which ones are and which ones are not going to be allowed. And then the second step is to look at each of those allowed uses and say, to what degree are they allowed? Will they be conditional or will they be straight permitted? Okay, so that's what that means. Keep in mind that that's a legislative process. In fact, Utah State Code Section 109A507 sub 4 says very specifically, a legislative body, which is our city council, shall classify any use that a land use regulation allows in a zoning district as either a permitted or conditional use under the scope of that chapter. So very simply, when you establish a zone, you've got to say what's allowed and what isn't, and in what form is it allowed, permitted or conditional. This is an example. It's just a very simple screenshot out of Chapter 714 that shows how exactly we do that. The vertical columns are each zoning designation from MR20 all the way up to MU160. It's all of our different residential zoning districts. And you'll see that there are 3 different types of listings with all of the permitted land uses down the left-hand column. You'll notice that there are 3 different types in each box. Either it's blank, it has a P, or it has a C. If it's blank, it is not allowed in that district as a use. If it's a P, it's a permitted use. If it's a C, it's a conditional use. And this is a very, very typical way of doing it. The vast majority of cities in the state of Utah do it in a very, very similar manner to this. It's either blank, it's a C, or it's a P.
What's P squared?
P squared just means that it's permitted, but there is a notation to that. And so there, at the very end of the table, there is a corresponding note that goes with that. So there's some special consideration.
We even have P cubed, don't we?
Yeah, we have P cubed as well, I believe. So I think we have P singular somewhere as well. So, okay. Are conditional use applications administrative or legislative reviews? Remember, we just talked about them being established legislatively. So are they legislative or administrative?
They're administrative.
Very good. They are administrative. Conditional use permits and conditional use reviews are administrative reviews. So what does that mean? The review and approval of conditional uses hinges on the satisfaction of the substantial evidence test, which, as you know from our legislative and administrative training, that the substantial evidence test is that quantum and quality of evidence on the record sufficient to convince a reasonable mind to support a conclusion. Obviously, there's a lot of subjectivity in that as well, but that's the defined standard of the substantial evidence test. So how can conditional uses be administrative reviews when they're established by a legislative process? How is that? How can it be one thing and then the other?
The administrative process reviews it to make sure it matches the legislative wording that's in place.
Very good. He's been doing some training on his own lately. It's very simply, Utah State Code Section 109A507, Sub 1A specifies that a municipality may adopt a land use ordinance that includes conditional uses and provisions for conditional uses that require compliance with objective standards set forth in the applicable ordinance. Very simply, it takes an administrative action to establish them, but then the process is implemented under an administrative review. Utah Code 109A507 Sub 3 is very clear and provides all the backing we need in that by saying a land use authority's decision to approve or deny a conditional use in an administrative land use is an administrative land use decision, point blank. Okay? The establishment of conditional uses is a legislative act, but the implementation of a conditional use is an administrative act, very simply. So, conditional uses and administrative reviews. And it jumped ahead on me because I was going to ask you this question first. Administrative reviews and decisions are based on the substantial evidence test in the city code. The city code obviously sets up standards by which we have to review them. So can we, similar to a subdivision, if it doesn't meet the terms of the standards for a subdivision approval, can we deny it? The answer is yes. Can we deny a complete application for a conditional use permit? Actually, the answer is no on that one, but it is unique in that. And the reason why it's no, we'll get into. Utah case law has established that the burden of the land use authority is to identify potential detrimental effects to neighboring properties and specific conditions to mitigate those detrimental effects on the record. It is the applicant's burden to comply with those conditions. So in fact, what we cannot do is say, there's no way to mitigate this, so we have to deny it. What we have to do is come up with some mitigating factor, no matter how ridiculous it may be. It's going to generate sound, you've got to put up 500-foot sound walls. And it's up to the applicant to either do that or not do their use. But you've identified a potential detrimental effect and a condition to address that. It's then, from that point, up to the applicant. So why does the Planning Commission deal with conditional use permits? Why do you think? Why not the council? Why not both of you? Subdivisions go to both. Why don't conditional use permits? Very simply, the city code is the legislative policy of the city council, including Title VII, which is the land use chapter, or land use title rather. The legislative authority of the city council to adopt the provisions of the city code in the terms they deem appropriate and which do not violate state or federal law. Specifically, Chapter 7.5 of the Tooele City Code addresses conditional uses. Section 753 sub 4 specifies that the Planning Commission is the approval authority over conditional uses. So how does that compare to the state code designation of a land use authority? The state code specifically identifies the decision-making body for anything regarding land use, a subdivision, a conditional use permit, a site plan, as being the land use authority. So who is that? The legislative authority falls to the council automatically. So who is the land use authority?
City council.
State code doesn't say.
City code.
There you go, the city code. So very simply, the land use authority is whatever the city code in their authority as the legislative body establishes for whom deals with anything. That's why the council sees subdivisions after you do, but they're land use. But you only see the conditional use permits. They don't go to the council. Just because that's what they've designated in the city code, very simply. I don't like this word, but they've basically abdicated their authority when it comes to conditional use permits to the Planning Commission to let you handle them. Okay?
It's appropriate since they're in the legislative body.
That's right. They have the ability to do that. If they wanted to come back and say, you know what, we are so tired of seeing subdivisions, we're going to let the Planning Commission do it. As long as it doesn't violate state code, they could do that too.
Pressure's on.
That's right. Looking at you, Councilman.
That's a good idea.
Just an example, I'm not making suggestions. So what's the process for conditional use permit? This is the stuff that you guys typically don't see, right? So first is the application. There's standard forms and information that come in with everyone. There's supporting materials and information that are needed as well, but that's more based on the specific use. So a conditional use, for instance, for a contractor storage yard, the supplemental information that come in would be different than a daycare. Okay, they have different considerations, and they have different specificities to each of their uses. There's no way to say this is the scope of information for everybody, and then have those two very different uses have to figure out how to do all of that, right? Because we won't address it sufficiently. So they each have their own different types of supporting information. And then we also require neighboring property owner notification. The way we do that is we actually have a requirement. The legal repository for property ownership records is the county recorder's office. We have an arrangement with the county recorder's office, which is very common amongst cities and county recorders across the state, where taking our application to them to say, hey, I'm filing for an application for a conditional use permit with Tooele City. I need the neighboring property owner notification range for this piece of property. They know our regulations. They know exactly what they need. They type in the parcel, and they print out actually a label sheet that we slap right onto envelopes to send to everybody. That way we're guaranteed that according to the official legal property records for Tooele County, that neighboring property owners all get the notification that should, and those who are outside of the range obviously would not. We then go through a process of scheduling which commission meetings they come to, and then issuing those public notifications in advance of that meeting so that they have proper notice. And then the next one is largely from Mr. Agard. There's writing staff reports, putting together documentation, and everything that you guys see in each one of your packets. And then you guys get to do your public hearing and make a decision. Following the decision, it's not over. It comes back to staff. We actually have a requirement under the state code to provide a written notification to the applicants of your decisions. So that actually takes place tomorrow, actually. So, findings of fact. Here's where the fun really starts to happen. Tooele City Code section 754 says that prior to approving or denying a conditional use permit application, the Planning Commission shall make, in the business meeting at which the public hearing is conducted or the permit is approved or denied, a finding of the following facts. Number one, the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use upon the adjacent and nearby persons and properties. Number two, the evidence identified regarding the identified reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use. Three, the reasonable conditions imposed as part of the conditional use approval intended to mitigate detrimental effects of the proposed use. Number four, the reasons why the imposed conditions and anticipated or hoped to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use. And finally, the evidence, if any, identified regarding the ability of the imposed conditions to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use. So what does that mean? It's a lot of words. What does that mean?
We have to mitigate any concerns that exist.
Even before that, you've got to identify them. You've got to very specifically identify them, identify what you're intending to impose to control those or mitigate them, why you believe that will accomplish the goal, and then obviously whatever evidence you're basing that upon, okay, that's on the record. So that's the process, that's the boring stuff. Now let's talk about how we got here. The evolution of conditional uses. In the state of Utah, there are two fundamental case law citations that provide the baseline for modern conditional use review. The first is Davis County versus Clearfield City from the Utah Appellate Court in 1988, correct, 1988. I was thinking 98, but it was 88. And the second is Wadsworth versus West Jordan City, also from the Utah Appellate Court in 2000. So let's take a look at these. First, Davis County versus Clearfield City. Davis County proposed to establish a center for the treatment of those suffering from substance abuse in a remodeled home adjacent to another older home used by the Addiction Recovery Center and across the street from a junior high school. Neighboring property owners appeared before the city at the hearing and protested. Clearfield City voted to deny that conditional use permit in response to what they termed public clamor. You ever heard that term before?
Yes.
Ever heard it in a positive light? No, you haven't. The Utah Court of Appeals found the decision to be arbitrary, capricious, and illegal, stating, very harshly if you ask me, nowhere in the transcript is there believable information or evidence on which the Clearfield City Council could have rationally believed that the proposed mental health facility would pose any special threat to Clearfield City's legitimate interests. That's a pretty scathing rebuke, right? It gets better. They also found that the maps presented and relied upon were arbitrarily drawn and were not presented or explained to the public. So tonight you've heard two applications, and you heard Mr. Agard walk through what those maps were, what they showed, and why. This is why we do that. Because it's been shown that if you don't sufficiently do that, either both in the staff report and in the public meeting, it puts you in jeopardy of being considered arbitrary. They also found that no studies were made, no opinions given by professional real estate appraisers, nor any credible evidence produced at the hearing to address claims of reduced property values. Opponents did not have factual support in the vague reservations expressed by either the single-family owners or the commission members. The reasons did not justify denial of the permit, quote, even though, that should be though, not through, even though they would have been legally sufficient had the record demonstrated a factual base for them, right? Could you be any, that's a pretty good slap, right? And then the denial of the permit is arbitrary when the reasons are without sufficient factual basis, and the consent of neighboring property owners may not be made a criterion for the issuance or denial of a conditional use permit. They went on to say, the oppositions of neighbors is not one of the considerations to be taken into account when determining whether to issue a development permit. Local governments must rely on facts and not mere emotion or local opinion in making such decisions. So what did we all learn from this one?
Before you, I don't want to answer that, but I have a question.
Come on.
When we notify those within 200 feet or whatever, is it just to let them know that something's going in? Because one screen back, what does it say? It says something about, doesn't matter what the neighbors think.
I'm trying to go back. Oh, it didn't let me go back. Sorry. I'm going to go forward to that point again.
Do you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Well, the answer to your question goes back to the type of review you're talking about. So is that the one you're looking at?
Consent of neighboring landowners may not be a criterion for the issuance of a denial.
Yeah, so go back to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about an administrative case.
Right.
It's entirely based on evidence. It's not based on emotion or feelings. That would be a legislative case.
Well, I'm just thinking about all the times that we allow the public to come up and almost waste their time just saying, not in my backyard, right? We hear that over and over.
Because they don't know how to present evidence.
They don't
Yeah.
present evidence, they don't
They just do their
why
motion.
it should be in my backyard, it's just, I just don't want it.
Right.
They don't present the reasons why.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask you to hold on to that point right there because it's well made, but we're going to see in the other case why that's important, okay? So I'm going to go back forward here a little bit to where we were. So what did we learn about this one?
Their record was not there.
The record was not there. This is why the record is important.
Give facts to why your decision is being made,
Yes. Yep.
and clear facts, not opinions.
Yep, and don't anger the Court of Appeals apparently.
Because they will come down.
They're not afraid to tell you what they think apparently. So what else did we learn about this one? What else have we learned from this case now about conditional uses? I'll tell you one thing that came out to me. In all of this rebuke from the Court of Appeals, they didn't necessarily rebuke the information the Planning Commission and Council received. They rebuked how they handled it. They rebuked that they didn't get it on the record, and they didn't treat it as evidence. Okay? It does not simply mean not in my backyard. Makes it evidence if you treat it right, right? What they didn't do was address concerns from a factual standpoint. They simply let that stand.
They smacked on the process, not the result.
Precisely. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about Wadsworth versus West Jordan City. Ralph W. Wadsworth Construction Incorporated applied for a conditional use permit to develop a site for the purpose of being a storage facility, what our code refers to as a contractor staging yard, for the company's heavy equipment, such heavy construction equipment, such as trucks and tractors. The site is immediately adjacent to an existing food process packaging plant. Okay? If any of you have driven down Mountain View Corridor, just after you cross 90th South, heading south on the right-hand side, there's a big building that has the word Dannon across it. That's a Dannon yogurt plant, right? Right next door is Ralph W. Wadsworth Construction. Okay, I was going to hide that, but since this is all coming up as one slide instead of line by line like I wanted it to, the cat's out of the bag with the next line. An employee of Dannon Foods attended the hearing and expressed concerns that open storage on the adjacent property would, quote, induce rodent traffic. Follow me there? Okay. Now, also keep in mind, that was an employee. They identified themselves as an employee. It wasn't the CEO. It wasn't an administrative individual. They identified themselves simply as an employee. It could have been anybody at the plant, right? Other neighboring property owners expressed concerns over possible dust problems. The Planning Commission voted to postpone or table its decision pending further investigation and directed its staff to explore the various issues presented regarding the application. This gets back to your question that you asked just a minute ago. How do you handle that stuff? You have the ability to do exactly what the West Jordan Planning Commission did. If there is evidence of concern, you can ask for an investigation or evidence to support that. It doesn't have to be from staff. It can be from the public that brings it up. They want to say, I don't like it because it's going to reduce my property values. How? Show me. Do you have evidence to support that?
I have Facebook.
That is 100% correct.
Facebook, you know what? I'll keep that comment to myself. But that you have the ability to request anyone who provides a comment to support that with evidence. If they can't do it, it's public clamor. Okay? You also have the ability to say, you know what? I can see how, for instance, I'll go to the dust issue. I'll skip over the rodent traffic for a moment. I'll go to the dust issue. I think it's reasonable to say a contractor storage yard has the potential to produce dust, right? Okay. Provide me some information. Okay, that's reason enough for me to say we potentially have a concern or a potential impact to be mitigated. Mr. Applicant, provide me with evidence regarding how you intend to control dust on this site. And we'll continue this application until you provide that. Okay, you have that opportunity. Moving on, the staff returned with 2 reports, one recommending denial of the CUP and the other approving it. Imagine what went on in that office during the week. The commission met to continue consideration, took additional public comment, reviewed the 2 staff reports, and denied the application. The applicants filed an appeal with the Board of Adjustments, and West Jordan City advised them that the City Council would hear the appeal over the objection of the applicant. Council told them that we'll be the ones handling this, not the Board of Adjustment. They objected. The basis of their objection was that as an administrative act, and the council being the legislative body, it should go to the Board of Adjustment as an administrative reviewer versus a legislative authority in the council. West Jordan City handled it by the City Council. City Council met, heard additional public comment, reviewed the information provided to the commission, reviewed the various staff reports, and upheld the denial, concurring with the conditions findings of fact. Remember me saying any findings of fact? Okay. The applicants filed a motion with 3rd District Court requesting that the Board of Adjustment hear their appeal of the commission's decision and then direct the West Jordan City to approve the CUP. Following a hearing, the court concluded in a summary judgment that the City Council's action in denying the conditional use permit were not arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. The applicants appealed, went to the appellate court, who agreed with the City Council that it was proper for them to be the appeal authority of the Planning Commission's decision, as their ordinance specifically identified that as the procedure for appeals of a CUP, it would go to the council, not to the Board of Adjustment. So they agreed with them in that regard. The appellate court disagreed with the City Council's actions were not arbitrary, capricious, or illegal, finding a number of things, I'm going to go through them, that the City Council made no findings the applicants were unable or unwilling to comply with the ordinance. The deference cited and employed by the City Council under Harmon City Incorporated versus Draper City only applied when acting in a legislative capacity. So basically what they did is they said, you employed the deference that you have in a legislative act to an administrative act. No good. In denying the application, the City Council relied on its findings that the city has made a significant investment in bringing Dannon to the area, and outdoor storage is detrimental to the area and injurious to the goals of the city. But the only evidence on the record to support this finding are the concerns expressed by neighboring landowners. The record doesn't reveal whether the commission staff actually investigated the concerns raised by the public hearing, which the Planning Commission asked them to do, or why they concluded that outdoor storage would be adverse to the city's goals. A little bit of a gap there, right? And then based on Davis County versus Clearfield City that we just talked about, the court found that the findings were insufficient to support the City Council's denial of the application. The sole evidence supporting the City Council's decision that the applicant's outdoor storage may be considered a nuisance are the concerns raised by neighboring property owners regarding potential increase in rodent traffic and dust. But the City Council did not satisfactorily find and determine that the applicant's storage would actually constitute a nuisance. They didn't get that report to say, give me something that shows how much dust you create. Give me something that shows the effect on rodent traffic, right? There is insufficient evidence to support the City Council's decision that the proposed storage, quote, is much different than that of neighboring properties and would be detrimental to existing and future businesses in the area. Why is that important? To the contrary, the evidence shows that there are several other parcels near the site which have outdoor storage areas similar to that proposed by the applicant. Now you see why that one's a problem?
Dannon's one of them.
That's right. The city council's decision is not supported by evidence and is therefore arbitrary, capricious, and without sufficient factual basis. The appellate court reversed the trial court's grant of summary judgment, remanded the case for proceedings consistent with this opinion. Once again, the appellate court getting fairly aggressive with how they're ruling. So, this is a current, from this fall, aerial. You can see Dannon Foods. You can see the 2 rows of roads just to the right. That's Mountain View Corridor. This is the Dannon Foods site, and that's the Wadsworth site. Notice how clean the Wadsworth site is. Notice how clean the Dannon Foods site is. Have you seen, well, I won't say it that way. What do you expect would be the effect on rodent traffic, looking at these?
The empty fields around.
Precisely. That's the argument. Any of the neighboring field to the south, maybe to the southwest of the Dannon site, how would they be affected any differently on the Dannon site than this project would? If anything, it kept a cleaner site than what would be expected for the undeveloped property around it, which would actually deter rodent traffic, right? Good times. So what did we learn from the West Jordan versus Wadsworth?
Well, I've got a question.
Yeah, fire away.
Could the employee act as a spokesperson for the company? You know, was that ever a factor? Or were they just
It is not, other than by their own policies. If they were potentially sent there by a supervisor to represent the company, if they simply took it upon themselves to represent the company for the purpose of the case information, they're one and the same. Having identified themselves as a representative from that site, they had a duty to provide evidence as to why they were making that claim on behalf of the company. What else did we learn from this one? Had a lot of moving pieces to this one. Can you start to see why these are the fundamental baselines for conditional uses in the state of Utah? Mm-hmm. They really set the box that we have to operate in many, many ways, right?
Well, did they have to provide anything like a particulate matter study or anything regarding the dust? I mean, I didn't hear any evidence to support either claim.
No, in fact, what they did is they took what the case file that we talked about didn't address is what happened after the case ruling. It went back to the city, and the city very cleanly and quickly approved it without any further action because, as we talked about, conditional uses have an inherent right to approval. And so they basically said, well, we're going to document it and approve it. And they did. And that's why they're next door and have been for almost 2 decades.
Okay.
So where do we go from there? There are really 2 cases that have had really moved the needle in any way, shape, or form regarding conditional use permits since those 2 at the start of the century. The first is McElhaney versus Moab, and the second is Staker versus Springville. In the McElhaney case, the Moab City Council denied Mary and Jeremy McElhaney's application for a conditional use permit to operate a bed and breakfast in their residential neighborhood. The district court overturned the council's decision to deny their application, finding that the council did not generate findings sufficient to support its decision. The Utah Supreme Court vacated the decision of the district court, which reversed the decision of the city council, finding that the district court erred by refusing to send the matter back to the council for the entry of more detailed findings of fact and conclusions of law. They didn't simply say, you're wrong. They said not only they weren't saying that the decision was wrong, they're saying you had to send this back for them to do it right, which goes back to the idea that they can't be denied. If you're going to get overturned, it's going to come back to you to do it right. Okay? The Supreme Court remanded the case for further proceedings, holding that 1, on an appeal of district court's review of an administrative decision, the court reviews the district court's decision and not the council's decision. The district court erred in overturning the council's decision without remanding the permit to the council to craft findings of fact and conclusions of law capable of appellate review. So they're simply saying you can't just say they were wrong and overturn them. You have to send it back to them to do it right. And you're not reviewing the actual decision they made, you're reviewing how they got to that decision. Okay? Now, I'm going to take a break and get, so what did we learn from here, right?
I'd like to comment on that
Be my
case.
guest.
I actually find the Moab case really troubling because the Supreme Court said, it's okay, City Council, it's okay that you didn't get any evidence, you didn't create any record at all. We're going to send it back to you so you can make it now. That's really problematic for all applicants for the court to allow the City Council in that case to create a record after the fact. It needs to be done up front. And so the statements of law that this case makes are sound, but the end result is very strange. I think it's questionable.
Yeah. So, an awful lot we learned from that one, and not very much going on. But the next case is Staker versus Springdale, which is a case that actually Mr. Baker sent around to you before the meeting for your review. And so very simply, I'm going to let him address this one, and then I'll come back.
I think Jim's done a great job in explaining Utah's law of conditional uses, and he's gone over a few cases. It's interesting that this case I'm going to talk to you about and the first two that we mentioned are not the Supreme Court of Utah, they're the Court of Appeals, which means that the losing party didn't appeal to the Utah Supreme Court. And the Utah Supreme Court didn't weigh in, so that the Court of Appeals opinion is the law, since that's where it ended. And it's interesting to me that the weakest of the four cases was the Utah Supreme Court, but that's how things go. My presentation will be a different kind of format than Jim's. He's laid it out very nicely for you. I just want to hit a couple of the high points, and you may remember me talking, it was only 2 years ago that I brought this to you to talk about in the first instance, and I'm hopeful that the kind of markings I made were helpful in thinking through the case. In this case, who made the conditional use decision? We'll talk about procedure for just a second. It went to the Planning Commission, and it went to the City Council. Both. So, do any of you recall what the role of the Planning Commission was in Springdale on this decision? It was a recommendation, which is kind of odd to have a recommendation on an administrative matter. Because all you're determining in an administrative matter is, did they comply with the city's rules? Why do you need a recommendation? It's either yes or no. But that's how they do it. I want to talk really briefly about something that Jim touched on. That is, when we have an appeal, whose decision is the appeal authority studying? So just picture in your mind going up a staircase, and in this case, it starts with the Planning Commission, who gives a recommendation. Then it goes to the City Council, who makes the decision. Then it was appealed to an appeal authority. Then it was appealed to the District Court, and then it was appealed to the Court of Appeals. So we have 4 levels of appeal here. What are all these appeal authorities looking at? The McElhaney versus Moab City case tried to answer that question, and it's It's, I think, a little bit of a bizarre answer, but it works. So in the Springdale case, the appeal authority is looking at the decision of the city council. That's kind of obvious because the city council made the decision. And the appeal authority is looking to see if the decision is arbitrary or capricious or illegal. And I'll talk to you just a second about that. The appeal authority upheld the city council. Then it was appealed to the district court. So whose decision is the district court reviewing? The city council's decision or the appeal authority's decision?
Should be the appeal authority.
It's the
shouldn't it?
appeal authority. So the court is not even looking at the original decision made by the city council. The district court is looking at whether the appeal authority made the right decision based on the record received from the city council. And then when it goes to the appellate court, whose decision is the appellate court reviewing? The city council's or the appeal authorities or the district courts? It's the district court. I think it's a little strange, but ultimately they're all looking at the same question. Was the decision arbitrary, capricious, or illegal? Now, in this case, the conditional use was a parking lot. Parking is a premium in Springdale. And some enterprising person saw an underutilized parcel and said, I can make some money here. I'm going to make a parking lot and charge a grundle for its use. It was a conditional use. This is why they had to apply for a permit. Now, around the parking area, I'll just call it the parking lot, was residential on three sides. Zoned residential and actual homes. And the city council denied the conditional use permit by saying that all kinds of bad stuff is going to happen. We're going to have lights, we're going to have garbage, we're going to have people walking across the parking lot. Oh no, we don't want people. It's kind of odd to say that someone parking in a parking lot is going to be a detrimental effect on a neighbor's backyard. You park by your neighbor every day, but that's one of the things they considered. Now let's hit arbitrary, capricious, and illegal for just a second. The words arbitrary and capricious in this context, in the law, don't mean arbitrary and capricious the way you read it in a dictionary. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean pulled out of the air, it doesn't mean any of those things. It means very specifically that the record created by, in Tooele it would be you, had no evidence. And if there's insufficient evidence, then automatically it's arbitrary and capricious and is a bad decision. If that didn't make sense, please don't be shy about telling me that didn't make sense, and I'll try to state it differently, because I deal with it every day, but...
It made more sense.
Okay. So it's actually very simple. If you don't have an adequate record, the decision is arbitrary and capricious and will be thrown out. You have to have a good record. Now, what does it mean to be illegal? If the conditional use would violate a law, then the conditional use can't be approved because it would violate the law. But if we turn that coin over and approving the conditional use would violate a law, then it's illegal. I didn't bother to think of an example, but we could try to come up with one. You asked tonight about setbacks, parking, and uses on the conditional use that you approved. If you had approved that conditional use and it would have violated setbacks, parking requirements, or the uses allowed in the zoning district, then it would have been illegal. and would be thrown out. So arbitrary and capricious is if you have a crappy record, and illegal is if your decision violates a law. I hope that makes it a little simpler. Okay. At this point, do any of you have any questions that came up as you were looking at the case?
Roger, I just wanted to say that there was something wrong with the file. I couldn't open it, so I was kind of hoping that you would show it to us. I didn't have a chance to read it, and I probably should have
Okay.
just brought my laptop in to see if there was something wrong, but.
Did
the
anyone
rest
else
of you
have
get to
that
open it?
problem?
No, I have a question, but
Okay,
Okay.
I still can't open it.
I can make sure you get a copy.
Thanks.
the
Yeah.
thing that blew my mind was the judge at the end who concurred and dissented. What was that all about?
Okay.
That I was really good until I got to that point, and then it seemed like that stepping stone that you described completely fell apart for what he was trying to say.
Yeah, it's unusual to both concur and dissent. Concurrence means you don't agree with the analysis of the majority that wrote the opinion, but you're going along with the result. And because you don't agree with the analysis and you want to write your own analysis, and he did that in a dissenting opinion. And I'll just give a spoiler. I think the dissenting opinion is the right one in this case. We'll go over that in a second. As you read through, you saw my notations that said rule and holding. I thought it might be helpful to explain the difference between a rule and a holding. A holding is a conclusion the court makes that's applicable only to this case, based on its facts. A rule is establishing generally applicable law that goes beyond this case. So they're both laws, but a holding only applies to the case they're dealing with. That's why I use those different terms in different places. Okay. I want to go to page 12, paragraph 28. So we're going to go through what the court found was the substantial evidence of detrimental effects. The first one, you saw I circled the number 1 there, was the fact that the parking lot use would be close in proximity to the surrounding properties. Is that identifying a detrimental effect? No, it isn't. The people that stood up and complained to the city council said, it's too close. But the court points out that the dissent points out that there isn't a single measurement in the record. We don't know how close. Well, there's one measurement. There's one house that's 20 feet from the parking lot. But we don't know how close it is to any of the other houses, where the entryways are, which direction the stalls are going to be facing. We just don't know. So they identified a concern, but there's no evidence at all about it. And then they discussed conditions, and they said, there's no condition that can mitigate this. That may be true because if you're thinking that to mitigate it, you'd have to move the parking lot, well, that's a condition they can't comply with because they can't move the land, you know. But is that really a condition for the proximity? I don't think so. You know what? Without going through these one by one, I'll just bring up some others. One concern was that the parking lot would generate garbage. Okay, that's a concern. What is the evidence that it is a concern? Because you can't just have an opinion or a statement or a worry, or you have to have some kind of evidence. What do you think they could have done to get evidence of that a parking lot will generate garbage? Any ideas?
Finding a similarly situated parking lot.
Go look at other parking lots. And if they're full of garbage, take pictures and bring it and show it to the city council or planning commission. That's evidence. Similar to the rodent. You can say all day long this is going to create a rodent problem. It means nothing unless you have some evidence. How about an inventory of rat traps with dead rats in them? You know, that's evidence. That evidence could go both ways if the traps are empty. What about light? Headlights. Creating, hitting the houses, bedroom windows, whatever, backyards. Is that a detrimental effect?
No difference in a street.
Could it be? What?
No difference than driving down a normal street.
Right.
Oh, I think it could be
It
there
could
could be a
be.
light
It
ordinance that,
If they had shown, and we've done this in the past, if they had shown that a car coming into the parking lot would park and have its headlights go right through Melanie's bedroom window or living room window, that could be a detrimental effect. Is there any evidence in this case is there any discussion of how headlights would affect individual residences? There's none. There's none. Let's say that there were. What could a reasonable condition be?
Side obscuring fence.
Side obscuring fence. You do it all the time. Did you see any discussion of that? The only discussion I saw was that there's nothing we could do to mitigate that. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask a question that's kind of off topic, but at the same time,
Yes,
it's
whatever you
tangential to
like.
this? So it seems like to me that all the way up through the process, the concerns were viable and valid, but the evidence wasn't presented. So basically, they got lucky in the fact that the city council and the appeals and all the courts agreed with what the planning commission said were valid concerns, and nobody brought up anything that disagreed. So if we have something that comes before us, the 7 of us, and 5 of us think it's valid and 2 don't, how does that get negotiated at the very base level?
Well, first of all, your introduction before the question is exactly right on. They got lucky because these concerns were raised by neighbors and people, but no evidence was presented. And the court decided that the mere discussion of potential adverse effects was enough to find substantial evidence of those effects, when the law clearly is that it's not. You have to have evidence. That's why I think this case is really strange. Now, let's get to your question, which was?
How do you determine which evidence you look at if there's disagreements on whether?
That's great. That's great. So the substantial evidence test, I'll shrink it down, is having enough evidence to convince a reasonable mind of a conclusion. If you have a majority of you that believe that are convinced or that are convinced that there is a detrimental effect and there is a mitigating condition, then that's a condition you can impose because you've decided you have the evidence and you have the condition and you have the evidence that the condition will work. And if there are 2 that disagree, theirs may be reasonable too. Reasonable minds can differ, but here it's the majority. If 4 of you think you have substantial evidence in one way and you're convinced, then that's the way it goes.
The reason why I had heartburn over this is because this case case seemingly flies in the fact of the things that I've heard for 10-plus years, that we've got to approve conditional use permits. But they didn't, and they've gone over similar things that we've gone over, and everything was upheld.
That's exactly why I want to discuss this case with you, because it lays out the law of conditional uses really well. It just reaches the wrong conclusion. It doesn't apply them. And so I wanted you to see the analysis, but also see the result. And Jim already touched on this, but to point out to you the absolute importance of having a good record that contains the evidence and not just hoping you get lucky. Because getting lucky in this case probably cost Springdale a whole bunch of money. And we don't want to go through that. So I hope that
Yeah, that
helped
helps.
answer your question.
I guess I wanted to vent more than ask a question.
So, that's probably enough. I would like to mention the public clamor issue. And, you saw the nature of my comments. I was critical, and I wasn't holding it back because I did this for me. So there is a part in this case that says, yes, it's true that we can't make decisions based on public clamor alone. But in this case, we had more than public clamor because everyone discussed all these potential problems. Do you see the problem with the logic that I just used? Everything they discussed was public clamor. They didn't discuss anything that wasn't public clamor. So even though they went through the motions of correctly stating the law, ultimately this case came down to public clamor and opinion not based on evidence that the court decided was evidence after all. So that's why I think the dissent is the correct opinion in this case. Let's not hope we get lucky. Let's do it right. Let's make a good record of what the problems are and get some evidence. Let's make a good record of what conditions will help and get some evidence. The view obscuring fence is the simplest example. We have a light problem. We have a mitigating wall. End of story. That's what you need. But you do need someone that would say, when you drive into this parking lot and go to this stall and this stall and this stall and this stall, you will shine your light in this window of this house. That's evidence. Not just that, well, we might have offensive light. That's
But you'd
opinion.
recommend photographic proof of that, because it's not evidence until it's evidence. That's just hearsay. Hearsay is the wrong word. It's just opinion. It's gonna shine in this room, in this room, in this room, in this room. Unless I bring something that shows it shining into this room, in this room, in this room, in this room, it's no different than the
That's
people that get
better.
in here and say, my property values are gonna go down, not based on anything other than their opinion.
Photographs would be better. Maps with measurements would be better. And you're right, it wouldn't be evidence in a civil or criminal court. But someone's testimony that they said, I went and measured it, and these are the measurements, and this is what the light would do. For a conditional use permit, that's good evidence. Because
A lot of times it seems like we impose conditions without any evidence other than the fact that we're just using common sense and we're being reasonable about it. And so it makes sense that we're protecting ourselves because we're stating what the concern is and we're mitigating it. But sometimes I think the evidence is lacking. We just have always done it that way, and so we habitually make that mitigating factor.
great, the next time someone says to you, their lights are going to come into my windows, all you have to do is say, tell me about that. How are they going to come in? Where are they parking? Where is your house? What's the distance? What's the angles? Get them to tell you, and then you're golden. So,
I guess a good example of that would be Breezeway Apartments, when we said the fire equipment and that wouldn't be able to get down there. We asked staff to get everything, actually took the fire truck out there and photographed it.
That's a great example. Thank you for reminding me of that. In fact, as staff, we had that very discussion. We've got to give some evidence to the Planning Commission. We're not just going to show up and say, well, it'll be hard for the fire trucks. That may be true, but it's not evidence. We need to give you measurements, road widths, shoulder widths, property lines, which I was not sure of, where's the property line, but.
I don't think the homeowners are either.
No.
You bet. References to fire code references that require access and minimum widths and all of that. And a picture of a fire truck, that's great evidence, so.
So
That,
let's say that someone writes a letter and they're worried about garbage in a parking lot that they're sharing, hypothetically. If they had included pictures as evidence, what kind of things could you mitigate with that? I recognize that there's garbage there.
Trash cans
Nothing.
placed.
That's exactly
But
it. You could
how?
require.
Like, they're already going to be garbage cans, so that's not going to help. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but we can't control what other people do either, so we
Maybe
can
not.
give them the opportunity.
Well, I bet there are already garbage cans
Our city
there all over
code
if you
doesn't
look.
require
I know, I just don't know.
trash cans in parking lots.
Right.
So, but you could impose that condition. We want trash cans of sufficient size in each corner or whatever, and we want you to produce a contract with a hauler that shows how often they'll be emptied.
Using your example,
My hypothetical example.
using your example of the trash question, getting back to the Springdale case, if that parking lot would have been applied for here, we've got nothing in our ordinance for that type of use that would require a dumpster or garbage cans, because it's just parking. So with proper evidence, you could then say, okay, we've got evidence that this is producing garbage beyond what's reasonable, so we're going to impose a condition that say that you have a garbage can in each of the four corners of the property, and that it's emptied no fewer than once a week. That would be a potential condition to address a question like that.
So to that point, even though our parking lot ordinance doesn't require a garbage can, if our conditional use permit ordinance identifies garbage pickup in cans, then that's one of the standards that the state code requires us to have in our city code. We cannot impose conditions that our city code doesn't anticipate. That's why we have 3 pages of possible conditions that we could impose. I want to end by mentioning something that happened to me recently, just in September. I went to a planning conference where the Utah Property Rights Ombudsman's Office gave a presentation on conditional use permits. And it was their opinion that city ordinances have to not only contain the types of conditions that you might impose, but have to have much more specificity. For example, if a parking lot abuts a home and lights are going to go into the home, one condition you could require is berming and landscaping or fencing that would interrupt that light pollution. And the Ombudsman's Office opinion was that your code would have to say how high the berm could be, how many shrubs and of what size they could be, how many trees and what type and what height and what spacing they could be. And if you didn't have that specificity, you could not impose those conditions. And I just got to tell you, that really irritated me, and because it's not correct. And I wrote to the Ombudsman's Office very carefully, because they're my friends, and very carefully exploring this issue and suggesting that that's not what state law requires. And they wrote back and said, thank you, we'll look into it and get back to you. Never heard from them. So I'm hoping that when I go to a planning conference this September and they give a conditional use class, that they will have pulled back to what state law actually says. You don't have to have that level of detail. It's enough to just say berming, landscaping, view obscuring structures to mitigate light pollution. That should be enough. Any other questions or comments? So I like the case. I learned a lot from it. I think Springdale got lucky and that the dissenting opinion is probably the more correct opinion. And so let's follow the dissent.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for giving me a moment to grab a quick drink, too. Okay, so some tips and tricks, just to wrap up here. Some friendly advice, if I could be so bold, as to you guys considering conditional use permits in the future. Can a conditional use permit application be denied? We know the answer to that. So understand why that is. Don't just know that that's the case. Understand why that is, and don't try. Don't try to be punitive. Consider the application based on its merits, based on what the terms of the city code say, and rule with proper judgment. Okay, that's a suggestion. Leave your emotion and personal perspectives at the door. Keep in mind that we're here to represent what the ordinance dictates we do, okay? Be clear about findings of fact. We kind of prod you and prompt you a little bit with the staff report, and we've given you an opportunity to say, you know, per the staff report. Don't be afraid to say, look, this is how I feel. The staff report identifies these topics. I think this one too. I think this one too. Or I disagree with it. This one is the case out of the staff report. So I'm taking that one off. You know, whatever the case may be clear about that. Yes, it seems repetitive and redundant, but that's the standard of review that hopefully we've shown you here tonight. Make sure that all the issues are clear on the record. We have a fantastic minutes taker. She does a great job for us. But we need to make sure that the record, which is the minutes, not the audio or video recordings, the minutes are what's considered the record when it comes to a case law. So make sure that that identifies what that information is, what the concerns and issues are, the detrimental effects, and the evidence that you're basing your determinations upon. Review that record carefully, and this one sounds a little self-detrimental, but don't rely on the staff or the staff report. Okay, we'll give you the best we can, we'll give you the greatest effort we can. Hopefully we're not leading you astray. I don't think we've done that. But be yourselves, okay? You're all smart people. Be yourselves, weigh the facts, weigh the considerations yourselves, and build off of what we provide you, okay? Don't be content to simply say, well, the staff's done the work, okay? Check us on it, okay? Do the evidence and do the work yourself. What other tips and tricks do you think would be helpful now that we've gone over all this?
I think
Staying awake through the training is probably first, right?
I think you gave us a good one tonight where we could ask for sufficient evidence of your claim of the public during their talk. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a little, I'll grant you, it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit delicate for someone who may be emotional standing here saying, I really don't want this, to sit there and say, why? Tell me why. Prove it to me.
Well, we need to know.
But you know what? That's the best way that you have the potential to help them. Or to help the applicant, as the case may be. It may be the applicant that's emotional. It may be the best way to help them is to ask them why. And unfortunately, create a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, but that's the record. And even explaining to them, look, I understand what you're saying, but why? Provide me some evidence that we can have on the record so that we can properly consider that as a part of this application. Okay? Ask that question. Great point. What about others?
For me, if I see something in your report that I can't, I'll actually go to where, I'll take my own little field trip.
Field trips are a highly recommended thing in my eyes. Okay? Obviously, we don't go as a group. But you have the individual ability. We're all busy, we all have things to do, but if you have the opportunity, I would encourage you, visit every site. No matter how many times you've seen a site, no matter how many times you've visited a business, going at it and visiting that site under the eyes of, I'm looking at it for this purpose now and not because I'm here to get my soda or whatever the case may be, you'll see things differently. And you'll pick up on things that maybe you hadn't before that are pertinent to what you're going to be doing. Absolutely, take field trips, great point. How about others? Okay, I won't bore you too much. Questions, we're done. What questions do you have for us?
I have a question,
Yeah.
Mr. Bolster. In the code, it says, and I've kind of brought this up a little bit before, but it says that they shall be approved within 30 days. That's kind of, sometimes we don't approve in 30 days on some of them. So I'm just wondering what that doesn't shall mean like you have to do it, or not approved, but decided upon or considered within 30 days.
Yeah, I believe I don't have it in front of me immediately, but as I'm recalling that criteria in the code, it's a timing mechanism by how long you have to start the review. And then you have an opportunity to continue it. You always have the opportunity to continue it so long as you're not just doing it infinito to drag it out for no reason. But typically, and I think this is the case for the citation you're referencing, it specifies that from the time of an application is received, we can't delay getting it to you, which means you've got to have your hearing promptly.
Okay.
And so it's really on us as staff to meet that criteria to get it to you. Once it comes to you, you've got the ability to take your time to review it, so long as you're providing diligent
That's when it goes
progress.
to the time certain or condition certain.
Correct.
Okay.
Am I wrong in saying that, Roger?
I think you are, I just don't remember what it says. I can look it up real quick.
Other questions?
You two back there, I don't mean to keep you back in the corner, but you got questions? Don't be shy. This is to benefit all of us. Help me out. I know I struggle with it because I don't want to put the city in a bad place, but I also want to hear the concerns and I want to do what's best for everybody, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. And
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I have this stuff figured out, but then like I read the email that Roger sent and I was like, what the heck? That's just completely
Yeah.
different than what we've been taught, you know? So I'm like get confused if like for, you know.
Yeah, just wait until your legislative update. You'll really get confused this year.
Now, with Roger's
I
thing,
don't wanna
when he sent it to me, it put a whole, I'm like, okay, for lack of better words, the light bulb come on and like, okay, this is how it's got to be done.
And you know, there will be things when you read staff reports that you're like, I never thought of that. I never thought this would be an issue. And how do I address this? We are available to you all the time. If you see something or question comes up in your mind from a staff report or any other case that's going on, give us a call, shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help you out with it as staff, anytime.
I might just
Yeah,
have one
and many of you have
comment.
done that, so I don't want to discount that. Yeah, Commissioner
I
Goches.
didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to bring up the fact that, we represent the public, and yet, public clamor is something, that you're not supposed to listen to, or should you listen to the public clamor? How much weight, should you give to public opinion
Well,
in
I
our
would-
positions?
I would clarify that just a little bit. The responsibility to the public really lies with the council. The responsibility of the planning commission, in fact, lies to the code. Because you're the body that actually implements, where the council is the one responsible to, and that's why legislative items always go to them. You've noticed that when we talk about delegation of certain things to you versus to them, they're all administrative. None of the legislative things, in fact, I don't even think legally they can delegate them to you. They have to lie with the council because they're the ones specifically responsible to the public. The Planning Commission has the opportunity to contribute to those items as a recommendation, as you did tonight. But as terms of the responsibility to the public, that really lies with the council. The Planning Commission is more of an implementing body. That's why you get to see and be the decision authority for certain administrative items like conditional use permits. So the question of public clamor is really, and Roger alluded to this a little bit, is where does clamor become evidence? It's easy to stand here and say, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't like this, I don't like that person, I don't like whatever, he's got a shaved head, I don't like him. And you probably shouldn't if you look like this. But anyway, that's public clamor. But if it's, I don't like this because lights are going to shine when you pull right in this driveway, it's pointed right at my back door, that's where it becomes evidence. If it stops at clamor, that's what has to be disconsidered. If it becomes evidence, or you can ask a question to make it evidence, that's when it can be considered. Is that helpful?
It's very helpful, but, I just wanted to bring up the fact that, these meetings are open to the public, and
Yes.
the public can comment, public hearing, and so I do believe that their opinions are important, and so I know there's a difference between just saying, this is my opinion, and the public clamor. I did appreciate what you were saying about the council's responsible, and that we're responsible to the code, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and your point is well taken as well, because, and I forget who said it earlier, 99.9% of the people who come to a public hearing have no idea that they have to provide evidence. They know that I've got a right to speak, and so I'm going to get up there and I'm going to say, you need to deny this, and that should be good enough. The key comes back to what we talked about earlier, is to say, okay, why? Help me define that. Help me understand what it is, and then get them to provide it to you as evidence. If they can do it, great. If they can't, they gave it their shot.
Commission, a couple of things. You may be interested to know that state law does not require a public hearing for conditional use permits. It's not required. It's historical, and it can be used as an opportunity to get evidence if you can coax the speakers to give it to you. So it's entirely possible the council could alter the procedure, but we're not pushing for it. For now, it is what it is. And in answer to Commissioner Jensen's question, our code does require that you make a decision within 30 days of the public hearing. And I think I can explain why that is. Because your objective of the hearing is to create a record. And once the staff has presented evidence to you, and once the public has presented evidence to you in the hearing, then you should have your record and be able to make the decision. And to not make it would just be arbitrary delay. If, however, you've had the hearing and you don't think you have the information you need, then by all means, make a motion to continue the hearing and resume it in 2 weeks, complete your record, and then vote within 30 days of the close of that hearing. You can extend the hearing.
Thank you for that clarification, Roger. Appreciate that. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your attentiveness. It's probably not the most entertaining topic to receive training on, but unfortunately it's one of the things that you probably deal with most often. So I appreciate your attentiveness and your questions and the discussion as well. It's very helpful for us as well. Thank you. And please feel free before you walk out to sign the roster so you get credit for this tonight.
Thank you, guys. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
Start asking.
What evidence do you have? What evidence do you have?
So following this, as we're arguing these things, that we better have some evidence. As we express it.
Have a good night.
I'll let you handle the date since we missed the last meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Looks like we're gonna get
That's
more
right,
snow
it is
tonight.
the last date, isn't it?
Uh-huh. February, yeah.
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
Perfect. Looks like we're gonna get more snow tonight too, so.
Yep.